Where's the record button? I could have sworn last time it was a lot easier to find. But anyway, I found the record button now, so it's all good. Hey guys, welcome to our conversation. We're going to be having about the Horus Heresy 2.0 rule system. So we're going to be doing a first impressions video where we just talk through about our first impressions of the game. We've had a couple of games now, so although we're not veterans by any count, we have had enough to know a little bit about how the system works and to have some views on it. So that's what we're going to do. I must say before we start, we are one man down, you may have noticed, from our Tale of Four Gamers format. So Aaron can't be with us, but I am joined by Ed and by James. There we go. They have indicated that they are alive. Brilliant. Okay, so first impressions on the rules. So the two games that we've played. So we played two games at the club, and I'm just going to go over to James just to kind of outline those, because James was the games master of those games and put them together. So why don't you tell us about the two games, James?
So I wanted to introduce the guys to Heresy at its best, which isn't the narrative version of the game. I mean, I love Heresy. I've been playing it since first edition, but the whole reason people play it is because of the stories that GW have written over the years, the Horus Heresy novels. I've got both Imperial Fists and Iron Warriors, so I thought the best thing to do would be the Battle of Fout, which was the naval battle between the two legions right at the beginning of the Heresy and ended in a boarding action of a ship. The ship was called the Contrador, and we reenacted Alexis Pollux's desperate gamble to seize the ship and escape the Iron Warriors' trap. So it was two games. The first game was a boarding action with Alexis Polluck and Erasmus Golg trying to seize like a staging ground of the ship. We used Zone Mortalis terrain, which it was fantastically provided at Hackney's tabletop. Beautiful terrain, just stunning. No real custom scenarios or anything for the first one, because we were just trying out the basics of the rules. So we didn't use Zone Mortalis rules or anything. But I think you both enjoyed the game.
Brilliant, brilliant fun. And then the second game?
The second game was much similar, but this one was Alexis Polluck advancing on the bridge of the Contrador. So we built a thematic board using the Zone Mortalis terrain and everything, with two adjacent corridors where there were two separate Imperial forces played by both of you, and then myself commanding the Iron Warriors. And both of those forces were advancing up separate corridors at a race against time to seize the bridge before the Iron Warriors could drive them back. So what began as a fairly slow grind became this really tense battle in the corridor, and really bloody game.
Oh yeah.
It perfectly represented the battle I felt and how you guys went.
Yeah, it was really fun. The table looked absolutely beautiful, and the scenario was a lot of fun. Definitely led to some good cinematic moments and some good narrative moments. I do actually have a recording of the second battle, not the first one, unfortunately. So the second battle will be making its way, once I've edited it, up onto the YouTubes at some point. So you will get to see that. Ed, I assume you had a good time as well. You seem to be enjoying it.
Really good time. Firstly, it's great to be able to play with painted models this early on in getting back into, well, for me, getting into Heresy the first time around, because I didn't get into it. I didn't have the money all the time to kind of get into it properly first time around. So it was really good to be able to play with complete armies at that early stage. I also didn't know this bit of the narrative particularly well, so it's a really interesting story, and James was really able to kind of narrate what was going on. And I think definitely anchoring it in the narrative really increases the fun.
Fab. All right, so shall we do a little bit of a breakdown now, maybe of the rules, and talk about some of the different areas of it? And I think probably what we'll do is we'll just kind of start with the mechanics, maybe go on to a bit about the kind of narrative and how the game facilitates that. A little bit on lists, but I don't think we want to dwell on lists too much, because that's not really the focus probably potentially of our interest, but equally I think probably of the video. And then it'd be useful, I think, as well, to kind of talk about some of the game systems and how it compares and stacks up, because we all, around this virtual table play quite a few games, so that's a good thing, I think, to do a bit of comparison. So maybe should we just jump in with mechanics first? Was there anything in the mechanics that you particularly liked or particularly disliked?
Again, I think the greatest part of this edition are reactions, by far. I've always had a bit of an issue with the I go you go format, where someone takes their entire turn and then your opponent takes their entire turn, because it's easy to get disengaged and think, oh, I've got like 20 minutes of my opponent playing their turn. And in Horus Heresy in particular,
go to the bar and get a beer.
In first edition, if you were playing a World Eaters Berserker Assault player, they would 10 minutes in their movement phase, and you just like, go.
And it works with quite a small, two small forces as well. Because when I read about reactions to begin with, I thought, okay, this has got to be when you've got a very large. It makes sense if you've got a very large force and you've got to make one decision about which of your units reacts in this context. We were playing with sort of 4 or 5 units per side. And when we did the second game, we split the Imperial Fists into 2, and James was playing the Iron Warriors. But still, reactions, they work with a small force as well. And you're kind of thinking, okay, here's all the sequence of things my units are going to do as they charge down the corridor, not only in my turns, but also in his turns as well. Reactions, I was interested to begin with, and actually having played with them, it works out really well. The Legion-specific ones are really cool. So we had the Fists in the first game. I think that was
the Imperial Jazz Hands.
Rename the Imperial Jazz Hands. I started scatting halfway through my first turn, and then there was it's law.
It's stuck.
That was it.
They're the Imperial Jazz Hands now forevermore, as far as I'm concerned.
It really adds a special kind of. It makes the Legions different and gives them like a really interesting sequence of things to do with both the Legion-specific reactions that we tried for both Iron Warriors and Imperial Fists. So I agree with James. They are a cool extra thing.
I think we had a moment in the first couple of turns of our first game where the Imperial Fists were closing up with the first Iron Warriors tactical squad. The Havocs with the Reaper autocannons. And there was a moment where the Fists were sort of sitting there in front of these gun sights, and it was looking a little bit grim. But then we realised the Imperial Fists special reaction, the best offense is best defense.
Best defense,
offense. That's the one. The best defense allows them basically to charge off into combat as a reaction to an enemy moving nearby, which promptly they did. And this Havoc squad, who thought they were going to have a free turn shooting, suddenly got jumped on by a squad of Imperial Fist breaches. And that was a moment where you really made me think. Particularly, I was like, this would never happen in 40k.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a very, very strange stratagem or something that might let you to do it in a very limited number of circumstances with an army, but in general, this is something that just wouldn't happen. And yet it delivered this wonderful kind of narrative moment where the Imperial Fist, you could just imagine them sort of, picking up their shields and sort of going off on an impromptu charge. That was really good fun narratively, but also in game terms was handy. As my perspective, I was playing the Imperial Fist in that game. So I think we're all agreed. Reactions, brilliant. Great fun. Add a little bit of resource management to the game, some extra strategic and tactical thinking, lots of narrative moments. Yeah, it sounds like we're all a fan. Was there anything anyone was kind of a bit less keen on? I find personally the way the special rules are divided between the books quite irritating. That's been commented a lot on online. That's not a new comment. And I also find the pure number of special rules. I'm used to playing more historical systems often that have fewer special rules. So I do find the high number of special rules. It's fine. It's well within limits. I've definitely played games that have more special rules. If you've ever played the Marvel games or the DC games, oh my dear Lord, or Infinity for that matter, great game, but too many rules for me, I'm afraid. So I'd say that for me is maybe something that is fine, but it's in the middle zone of if there was any more, I think it might become a bit too much.
When it gets to like events and you're playing multiple different players who have multiple armies with each with their own particular special rules, that's where I think it's going to be a bit of a challenge. Whereas we played the game last time with the same armies as we did the previous one, so I had more of a handle on what they were going to do. I think that's going to be one of the. It's great to have. I think it's one of the advantages of the system that you have things doing interesting technical things. You get a certain amount of fun out of. Deflagrate. I think is a level of mechanical complexity that you may not get in other games. Like I play a lot of the Osprey Blue Book games, and you just don't get that level of, count how many successful die and then roll the same number of die to see if you get more wounds. That's a level of complexity you don't get in other games, but at the same time, it does really recreate the idea of lightning sparking between these guys that you fired your weapons at.
So got charges, wasn't it, on your breaches that did that?
Yeah. And so it's it's a challenge to get your head around, and I'm only just starting that process. But when they're there for a reason, they do cool things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the great things about second edition compared to first is they've actually stripped down the number of special rules and condensed them. There were quite a lot of blow, where because you'd had a number of the black books released over the years, the big weighty tomes, a lot of them had rules where it mirrored a rule in a previous book, but they'd never looked at it again. So the rules are slightly similar or phrased in different ways, and it could get really convoluted and confusing. So it's great that they streamlined it, but one of the complexities is that everyone is at the moment is playing Space Marines. And every Space Marine has got only nuanced differences between one another. There are some vast ones, like an Imperial Fists list is worlds away from a White Scars list. But until we see the likes of the Mechanicum or Talons of the Emperor or even Demons of the Ruinstorm on the table, we're going to be in that world of nuance. And if you think special rules are bad now, Demons of the Ruinstorm.
I was about to say, I suspect it will be one of those things where at an event or when you're playing with your mates, if someone puts a Space Marine army on the table, you go, okay, fine, I have a pretty good idea of what this thing's going to do. Someone puts down, a demon army or a Mechanicum army, and you're going to be like, can you just explain how all this works?
I'm sorry to say, I am that guy who puts a Mechanicum army down because I just absolutely love the Mechanicum. And I'm really excited for them to be released sometime in August.
Oh, is it? Great. Well, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
I want to see the models because they do have really cool models often.
Oh, they do. Yeah, I've got, I think it was the first Heresy army I collected properly, was Mechanicum. I went to a games day at the release weekend and just bought Phalanx because I saw them and thought, these guys are cool.
And you can take those in a Marine army if you take the, not Praevian, Forge Lord.
Mm-hmm, you can, yeah.
So that's a nice little bonus if you, want to kind of work them in on the edge. The only other thing I was going to mention was, AP. So obviously they've shifted back to the old-fashioned way of doing AP. So obviously that changed in edition, 8th and 9th edition of 40k, where they went to the modifiers rather than the sort of absolute figure where you either penetrate the armor or you don't. I must admit, I quite liked the new version in 8th because it felt like a bit of a fresh air, and it reminded me of how they used to do it in the old Warhammer Fantasy Battle, and I quite liked how the armor save modifiers in that worked. But I must admit, I think both work equally well, and the system seems quite well put together, in terms of there aren't too many weapons that actually can punch straight through a power armor save in the game because they've knocked plasma down, haven't they, to AP4. There's a lot of AP4 and AP5 weapons, and actually not a huge number of AP3, and AP2 is pretty rare as well. Mm-hmm. So it does feel like it's a reasonable balance. And that is a nice thing, I guess, because when you have modifiers, your 2+ Terminator saves are suddenly almost all the time going to be a 3+ or a 4+ save. Whereas at least in this system, Terminators, for example, are pretty hard to get through. I mean, I was trying to knock them about with my power weapons on my Phalanx Wardens, and they were having none of it. I was basically just tickling these siege Terminators with power weapons. They were not interested at all. It took Alexis Pollock to wade in there with a power fist before actually anything happened, which he did. I almost don't want to spoil that moment, but it was pretty spectacular. I'm quite looking forward to posting that bit up online because it's
there's a reason he's called the Crimson Fist.
There is, yeah, and he showed it. Okay, before we move on from mechanics, anything else that anyone wants to say about mechanics in the game? No,
I think we've covered everything, and certainly at the moment where we've just played small Zone Mortalis games, we've yet to experience vehicles or even how dreadnoughts work just yet.
Yeah.
And certainly dreadnoughts at the moment are one of the most contentious parts of the second edition, which seems to be the most overpowered at the moment, as they've moved from being vehicles to being almost monstrous creatures. So I'll be interested to put some on the tabletop, which is, I'm sure, what we'll do in the next game.
I really like the dreadnought models. It must be said, they are, I can see accusations of cheese perhaps winging their way to me, but they are really, really, really nice models. And all the vehicle kits. I mean, the Kratos is really nice as well, but they they're really good kits, and I really want to put some on the table. So hopefully there's a way of doing that without scaring everyone away from the table instantly. Who thinks, oh god, here's dreadnoughts, this person's going to be wiping the floor with me.
They're also great fun to build because they're just so posable. You can really go to town with them and have them kicking Space Marines away.
They've got great character, haven't they, for a vehicle? As you say, because they're humanoid, you can convey a lot with them than you can. Tanks are great, but you can't get as much of a story out of them.
No, not at all.
All right, let's move on. Let's talk about narrative then. So we've kind of touched on this a little bit, haven't we, already? But for my book, it feels like there are lots of opportunities in this game for telling, for having really good narrative moments. The reactions are one of them, and we mentioned the bit with the best defense. And in general, we had some of the cool moments, didn't we? Where, for example, when we were storming up the corridors in the Contrador, and the reaction from the Iron Warriors allowed them to basically just lay down this absolute, blanket of bolter fire. Where rather than getting to shoot, say, once, they got to shot, at least it was a couple of times, wasn't it? So it was essentially, the reaction in that case allowed them to kind of do a lot more.
That was Fury of the Legion, the tactical special rule,
where they kind of just unload the bolters. But it did make for a really dynamic moment in the game where you can just imagine this bunch of phalanx wardens or whatever kind of approaching down the corridor. They've just used a breaching charge to blast open the bulkhead, and they're running through, and a corridor full of Iron Warriors are just kind of unleashing this bolter storm down the corridor at them, and they're not just going to stop shooting them because it's their turn, as it were. They just keep on flying away as they come up the corridor, and that was quite a fun moment. And then obviously once the phalanx wardens actually got into contact, it was goodbye Iron Warriors. I don't know, was there any particular moments that jumped out at you, or just thinking more broadly about the kind of narrative potential of the rules?
I think that, and special characters in particular, having Alexis Pollux on the table, who the Crimson Fist was great, and also having him against Erasmus Gold, sort of a thematic matchup, was pretty fun. Pollux's rules are very strong, and he's a very powerful special character. Not quite the best Imperial Fist special character, looking at you, Sigismund, but still pretty solid. And it was just great to have someone like that, a character from the books. It was really cool because it meant that his actions felt like they had some more of a weight than, say, little Timmy the Praetor. Although a lot of people do make their own wonderful narratives and stories, and I think that's one of the best parts about Horus Heresy, is you have so much opportunity to do that.
Yeah,
you've got both, haven't you? Because you've got the opportunity to make your own story within a quite a big world, but then you've also got the Black Library novels and the characters and stories from there. And personally, I've been just going through the start of the Black Library series on the Horus Heresy, so I'm just about to finish Fight of the Eisenstein, so book 4. And really enjoying them. They're Black Library books, so they are what they are, but they are very, very enjoyable. And the characters, to feel the kind of characters jumping out the page of you a bit more is really nice. And I must admit, after I'm doing Sons of Horus Army, and it's going to be a Traitor Army, but after you sort of, once you get through those books, you're quite like, maybe I should have done a Loyalist Army, and could have had Loken or whatever in command. But anyway, that's I guess the joy of it is at the end of the day, they're basically wearing the same equipment, aren't they? I know they repaint their armor later on, but for the most part, it's probably fine. The other thing I was going to say is that the lists for the legions feel quite characterful. So there's enough of a difference that you definitely feel like you're playing the Imperial Fist, for example. There's lots of shields, lots of kind of defense. They're really good with their bolters. There's enough to make them feel like they're different armies, even though they're all Space Marine legions, and to kind of help you tell that story. Because obviously, one of my fears a little bit getting into the Heresy at the beginning was that potentially the armies would be a little bit too similar, and each legion would feel a bit too much like another one. And I kind of rationalised this to myself that was a bit of a silly worry, because I'm quite happy to play a game, say a World War II game, where everyone on the board is basically a rifleman, with a rifle and a tin helmet from a different nation, and yet the Space Marine Legion, in a way, it's kind of similar dynamic, isn't it? Really, your flavors are the same thing. But I think actually in the game we had, there was lots of storytelling between the different legions. They felt different. The Iron Warrior siege tyrants, for example, when the doors open and those huge rocket launchers go off, they definitely feels like Iron Warrior behavior.
I think, just putting tyrant siege tyrant inside a ship was an amusing concept.
Yeah, you'd imagine the rocket pods just scraping along the ceiling as they go.
But I guess that they're up against the wall. Their bridge is being stormed by Imperial Fists. So you're not going to. This is not the point for subtlety. Not that the Iron Warriors do subtlety. But,
Not really, no.
I thoroughly get the impression they do not.
It was good because I didn't, like I said, I didn't know this story, and I don't even really know those legions particularly well because they haven't majorly featured in any of the books that I've read. But I know from like generally being around Games Workshop lore for long enough, enough to get a vibe of what they're about. And yeah, I obviously James had created the scenario, he painted the models. We also converted up the because there's not a model for the Iron Warriors villain at the piece whose name I forgot.
Gog.
Yeah, you converted up a dude that looks like him, and so yeah, I was enjoying the narrative even though I hadn't actually read any fiction about it. I was already in. It felt like a narrative game, even though I didn't already come with a narrative, with an awareness of what that narrative was. And the rules, I think. This is very impressionistic, but the vibe I get is that the rules reflect the narrative and they encourage narrative at the moment, rather than getting in the way of narrative. Because you can do narrative with whatever, really, if you've got a amenable person you're playing with. But the sweet spot is where the rules engender a narrative experience. And like I say, my impression at the moment is these rules do.
I feel the same. Certainly towards the end of first edition, we were moving away from that, and suddenly everyone was turning up with a turn 1 Leviathan in a drop pod, or a apothecary on a jet bike, and you're like, okay, well, this is cool. It's a good build, it's a good list, but does that really reflect what the Iron Hands would do all the time? Right? Does it feel characterful? Not sure.
Yeah.
That's an excellent segue into the lists part of the discussion. Do they let you build characterful lists? My impression so far is very much so, and as you say, it's a toolbox, and you've got at your disposal the capability, no doubt, to make some probably wicked cheesy lists that are stacked full of whatever the current hotness is. I gather it's Contemptors at the moment, and probably come out in when they come out in plastic. So no doubt there's options for people to do that and to kind of throw out the new hotness. But there's also a huge amount of, because the game gives you so many choices, because those books are so big, the lists are just stacked with unit types. Like, you really do get the chance to kind of really shape the Legion how you want. I mean, even the troop section, for example, it's not like you get a tactical squad and that's it, and you're taking some tactical squads. I mean, tactical squads are great, you should take them, but you've got choices. You can take the despoiler squad, you can take the assault squad, you can take breaches, you can take, I think, is it recon squads, scout squads. Like, there's a whole load of stuff you can take, even in troops, which it feels to me, this feels like a game where when I was sitting down reading through the army list, I sort of felt that you could collect one of these armies for a really long time before you felt that you'd kind of like padded out all your choices and you kind of had everything to pick from, to the point where you look at it and just think, in a way, you're better off just picking a theme for a force, doing the thing that they do well, and then if you want to kind of do a different thing, maybe just collect a different legion, which is probably what Games Workshop wants. Collect a different legion, and then take, kind of do the army, in that, because there can be literally basically no overlap between those two lists. You could take completely different units in those two lists, and you wouldn't necessarily have to kind of share anything apart from maybe Predator, which you have to have essentially.
Yeah, I think that's reflected perfectly with Rights of War. I absolutely love that mechanic. It was great in the first edition, and it's great now, where you can sort of say, well, I want my army to do a really specific thing. So in Imperial Fist, we use the Stone Gauntlet, which is all about breaches and phalanx warders and making them really strong and really tough, and it is almost all about defense and having that shield wall. And the Iron Warriors use the Hammer of Olympia, which is all about ridiculously overwhelming firepower. And those two lists were almost polar opposites in the way of an unstoppable force, a movable object, that sort of thing. Likewise, I've been collecting Iron Warriors for a long time, so I've got quite a lot of choice. So I had both the Hammer of Olympia, but also enough to do their other Rite of War, the Iron Fire, which is all about artillery strikes. And they feel different, even though the flavour is about the same, because it's still overwhelming firepower. But Hammer of Olympia is all about close-ranged firefights, whereas Iron Fire is all about shelling and using your Medusa batteries and your Minotaurs and everything.
Putting your First World War hat on.
Yes, yeah. Reenacting the battle of the first day of Verdun.
Basically.
In 30k, basically.
Get some Krieg on that table.
And it's such a thematic thing to do. And it really, really speaks to the Iron Warriors.
That is another thing about the Legion book. It does feel like almost everything in that book has a place. possibly not the scouts. I don't,
I
I don't quite see what their use is when you've got the recon marines in there. But
yeah,
I'm not big on list building, so maybe I've just completely missed the point.
I think because you can do them now, because you didn't have scouts, it was recon marines. There seems to be more just purely based on what I'm seeing on Instagram. I'm seeing more people going, "Oh, I can play with these models because I haven't done that from 40k." So I've seen some interesting things that you could do with that. But I think at the moment they make more narrative. They give you more narrative opportunities. Get that midway through the heresy, and you've not got enough tech to make proper space marines. You're just like, oh, here's a bunch of gangers. We're going to try and soup them up with as many.
Will do.
Sort of pump them full of war hormones.
You've just bred a fantastic idea. That's a brilliant idea because because in for the Sons of Horus army and in the lore essentially they get to the point where obviously they do take the casualties. Obviously a lot of their people are from Cathonia, which is a gangland, horrible gangland, subterranean hellhole. And they're basically grabbing these, gangers and trying to induct them into the Legion as quickly as possible. And that's a really good point. You could use the profile of, because they're a little bit less tough and a little bit less lower leadership, I think, would be quite a good way of representing them. And use, rather than using scout models, which are fine, but I think personally, I find a bit unexciting. You could grab some gangers or something from Necromunda.
Goliath gangers.
Yeah, do them as like Chthonian, it's basically Chthonian gangers who've been pulled in and given some slightly makeshift armor and equipment.
You can't have enough extra pancreases, so.
How does this game feel in the round of our gaming experience?
Although there are more rules, it feels like Heresy is doing something uniquely Heresy-shaped, as it were. It is enabling you to you've got a degree of granularity, if I'm using that word right, that different things do different specific weapons have different effects that reflect how in the narrative they're different.
Me and Ed had a game of one-page rules. I don't know, James, if you played it at all, but we had a game of one-page rules a few months ago where I used my Dark Angels Heresy army that I got from Andy, and you used your Space Orcs, didn't you? I love your old school Space Orcs. They're the proper. I might find some pictures and put them up, but they're the proper old school 90s.
Goblin green bases.
Goblin green bases.
Actually.
You've done them in all the bright colours as well.
Fantastic.
They're beautiful. But we played a game of one-page rules. And also did a slight mod in that we ported in the activation mechanic from Bolt Actions. For those who don't know, one-page rules is usually an alternative activation game. So you kind of pick a unit, then your opponent picks a unit, and you do all of their stuff. Then you move on. We pulled in the Bolt Action dice draw mechanic, which is where every unit has a dice that goes in a bag. You pull out a dice at the beginning of the turn. Whichever colour the dice is, it goes to that player, then they use it to activate a unit. And you keep doing that. And it's an interesting thing because it breaks up the turn order a little bit, and it means that the more dice you have in the bag, the more likely you are to get one out. And it creates a really interesting sort of friction and kind of underlying it. There's some quite interesting maths going on about your chances of going next, depending on how many you've already had out and how many units are on the table. Anyway, it's quite fun, but you don't have to do that, and I don't think it's vital to one-page rules at all. But we played this one-page rules game, and I quite enjoyed it. And but I wondered, and I sort of had in the back of my head, I was like, if the Heresy rules don't work out, then we can just play one-page rules and it'll be okay. But I sort of feel like we don't really need to do that, and that's kind of a bit of a relief. How do you feel about that, Ed?
Yeah, no, I think you'd be missing quite a bit if you just did one-page rules. I think one-page rules is great, and we only had 1.5 games when we played it. But immediately I was going, yeah, no, this makes it. It's certainly superior to my mind to playing modern 40k. But you wouldn't have. I think Heresy is doing something specifically Heresy-like that I feel is
Valuable.
Valuable. I want to stick with. So yeah.
Do you want to tell the viewer about your Saturnine idea?
Yes, I've been brewing in my head a scenario to reenact the fantastic novel Saturnine. So the idea is having a Zone Mortalis game. Everyone plays a kill team led by a character like Garrow or Endrittar, and the job is stopping the Sons of Horus as they're breaching the dungeons of the Imperial Palace. So they'll sort of randomly appear in grids and squares of this Zone Mortalis board, and you've got to quickly destroy them before they pop up again. It's kind of like Whack-A-Mole, but with Space Marines. And pretty solid characters. And you gain victory points for X amount you kill. And Sons of Horus gain victory points for living, I guess. But I'm trying to work out an AI system of doing it so that it's a cooperative game. So everyone's kill teams are sort of allied, and you get victory points competing against each other for the most kills.
Yeah, that would be good. I really like those kind of games where you have players sort of on the same side, but not on the same side.
And then the Sons of Horus would literally be like rolling on a table, and then on a 6, they'll appear at this particular grid square. So then you've got to deal with them.
So, okay, so basically, I think we're all in a pretty good place with Heresy. We think it's got wheels. Got wheels? We think it's got legs. Maybe it's got wheels as well. The tanks have got wheels. The men have got legs. It's got tanks and wheels. All sorts of things. So we're generally, I think, in a kind of fairly positive place about it, which is great because it's good for painting motivation to not feel like what you're doing is ultimately going to end up being one of those games that sits on the shelf and doesn't get played. And it's worth saying as well, I think, at our local club, we are of the Hackney Area Tabletop Enthusiasts brand. There seems to be quite a lot of interest in Heresy, and you talk already even of a narrative weekend, I think at the end of August, which I'm not going to be here for, but I'm sure others will be. So it sounds like it's going to be quite an interesting scene where there's quite a few people who are interested. So
watch this space.
I think there's a lot of people who did it first time around coming out of the woodwork.
Okay, brilliant. Well, there we are. I think basically Heresy, it's a go. It's good. It's worth playing. Go and play it.
It'd be awkward if it wasn't because of the money I've spent on the system.
Yeah,
you put yourself down in a dark room and have like a serious, one little dark room, but have a sort of serious talking to yourself about your life goals.
Sunk cost anonymous.
Yeah.
I think that may have hit home a little bit too much. Okay, right. Well, goodbye.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Hey guys, welcome to the end screen. A new video will come up from YouTube. Go on, click it. You want to. Still here? Go on, click the video. You want to. It makes sense.